I always wanted freedom. I never wanted to rely on anyone else. And I think I'd always kind of been interested in entrepreneurship, watched Dragon's Den from, quite a young age. I always just had this feeling that actually the only way to really achieve financial freedom is probably through entrepreneurship in some way. So I always kind of had this dream of almost just doing something of my 20s, kind of making all the sacrifices to build up enough freedom that then actually going on to have a family, I could make the choices to really spend my time where I wanted to.
Is that why you went and studied management studies?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting because I never knew if I wanted to go to university or not, because, I believe in university very much. If you want to become a doctor, you want to become a lawyer, there are subjects that you really need to learn. Business is one of those where it's always hard, like, do you learn that at university or do you learn that in doing? So I came across this course, which was business management in company, which is quite a unique course, which was at Nottingham Trent University. So it's sponsored by different blue chip companies. So Rolls-Royce, Boots, Barclays, Tesco's, companies like that. They take on 40 people into this course. We would work 4.5 days a week for whichever company are sponsoring us. And then the other half day was kind of our study time, although obviously there was much more than that. And actually we'd go, so I chose Boots. Well, we went through interviews. Boots was my first choice and I was lucky to get there.
Boots, for anyone that doesn't know the store, if you're overseas in America or something, it's kind of like CVS or something, isn't it? Pretty much that's the equivalent. So if we just pause there then, what's your opinion now on university? When your children get to that age where they're about to make that decision, you've got 2 young children, when they get to 18 years old, and if they said, Mummy, I want to be an entrepreneur like you, what advice would you give them based on your experience?
So I actually would always probably recommend doing a few years in a corporate, because I have to say at Boots, I learned so much. You learn the things that they do really well. You learn the things that they do not necessarily wrong, but just the drawbacks of being such a big organisation. So I think, more than going to university, like the 2 placement years I did at Boots, I learned incredibly so much. And depending on the kind of person you are, if you go to a big corporate, it's so difficult to impact the culture there because there's just so many people, there's so much history. And if you are someone who's kind of got this strong drive to make a change, then, entrepreneurship, I think, is just an incredible area. And even if it's not your idea, but going to join a startup is just incredible energy. It just would always be what I would recommend.
At that point, if there was a key skill or a key set of skills that you took from your time working in a corporate at Boots that then proved to be incredibly valuable as you went on, what were those skills?
So when I graduated, I then stayed on and I was an assistant buyer to begin with, and then I got promoted to be a buying manager for them, which was really around relationships. It was about collaboration. It was about looking around the world, seeing new technologies, finding the innovation, new brands, and then really hand-holding those, which mainly were entrepreneurs, to come into Boots to actually show them, look, this is how we could launch. We had a stand, it was called Latest Finds. We would launch a new innovation for a period of 3 months as a trial to see if it would work. Would Boots consumers like this? If it did, they would get a listing with Boots kind of long term. And that just really suited my skill set because it was a very entrepreneurial role. Because actually, I very much guided them with PR agencies and actually how to build the plan. And, we used to have this saying of like launch and love, because actually it's one thing to get a listing at Boots. It's another thing for your product to actually be picked and taken off the shelf. Like the listing is just the first thing, you have to drive consumers. You have to have that entire plan. And I think it was just a really good way of actually learning from working with supply chain, working with finance, doing the checks, with legal. Can we do this? What can we say? It was a really good sense of actually working with so many different departments and actually starting to understand, I think, consumer goods, learning demand, learning how to create it. So I feel like that role was created, which really just suited my skill set incredibly well. And I'm very fortunate for that. And then that's also how I met Brandon. So actually it had a huge impact on obviously my next stage too.
And Brandon was a business he he had a business you were maybe looking at?
Yeah,
or?
so he was with his previous business, which was called Indeed Labs. And we launched a couple of their products through this program, Latest Finds. So I'd worked with him, and I remember, and actually this sounds alien now, so many years ago, but you couldn't check your emails when you left the office. So often every morning I'd come in and I was dealing with a lot of international entrepreneurs. So I'd always come into like an inbox full of emails. And I always remember like looking for his name because his email was always so full of energy. He always signed it off, smiles, Brandon, just someone whose positivity, his passion just kind of really shone through, that I'd always go straight to his emails, kind of open it. And, the launches that we did with Brandon and Indeed Labs were some of the most successful we did through the innovation program. And he was just, when he used to come to the Boots head office in Nottingham, it was bouncing off the walls with kind of this infectious energy. And I remember just from the day I met him thinking, gosh, I always want this person in my life, because he just had this aurora and just someone who you knew wanted to actually also make the world a better place and kind of really cared about doing good and doing things differently.
And at some point you start having a conversation with him privately about launching a business, your own business, and then he's launching his business, right? Yeah,
so I remember he suddenly left Indeed Labs. Now, Indeed Labs, he founded it. It was a rocket ship. It was kind of doing super well. And I remember getting this message from him that he left and just being like, shocked, as in like, what has happened? So then when he was next in London, I met up with him, and obviously he told me about his reasons for leaving. He was going to do this next thing, and I'd always kind of had this viewpoint of wanting to do my own business. And ever since I worked in beauty, I found that, I always had friends, family, everyone asking, what's the best mascara? What's the best foundation? And just how we'd go to TripAdvisor, to look at kind of ratings and reviews for restaurants and hotels. I wanted to create the same thing for beauty that actually ranked the products. So I told Brandon my idea and said, I want to do this. What do you think? Do you have any advice? He told me he wanted to start something called Deciem, which was from the Latin word for the number 10. It wasn't designed to be a beauty engine at that time. There was a beauty concept, but there was a technology concept, there was a food concept, so kind of just lots of different ideas generating, but with this viewpoint of doing 10 things at once. So we said, why don't you come and help do Deciem with me, and I'll help do the beauty, we went on to call it BeautyWise with you. So then obviously I made the decision to leave Boots, which obviously I was at the age of 23, 24. And I remember telling mum, and everyone's like, oh, like, you're in a really good business, you've got a good, you're already achieving things. But I just knew that I wasn't meant to be there forever. So I left 10 years ago, and then it was the start of Deciem.
I've got to say, this idea of doing 10 brands at once seems like it's counterintuitive to anything you might read in a business book that speaks to the importance of focus. Was there any sense in that, in your view? So
in actually our office in Melbourne, we used to have on the wall, focus is overrated, because everyone does tell you not to do 10 things at once. And actually, there were so many benefits to doing 10 things at once. So first of all, it was this viewpoint of trying to create this ecosystem of, how do we have our own manufacturing, do our own comms in-house? Because, and again, it takes funds to set up that ecosystem. But also, so many entrepreneurs, which I understand why they're in this situation, but so many entrepreneurs have to outsource everything. They go to the PR agency, they go to a lab, they go to someone to do your R&D. And then you're really just coordinating all of those efforts rather than, so it was a privilege we could build this whole ecosystem, because then at the table, everyone's sat there, everyone's generating ideas. And again, if I think around doing comms in-house, it's a lot for one brand to pay, but if you've got 10 brands, suddenly you can look at it as 10% of everyone's salary. If I'm flying to Australia to meet a buyer, well, do I want to present one brand or do I present 10 brands? And also just this, area of, you don't know what's going to, if you're in consumer brand, until it starts selling, you don't really know what's going to be. You can do all the research and all the insights in the world. Until something gets traction, you don't really know what's going to work. So it also just set up this incredible structure that we could fail. We could keep trying things. We could fail relatively cheaply, quickly, and kind of start the next thing.
What's the downside, though, of doing 10 brands?
So I'd say the downside in the later years is because The Ordinary has become such a huge success. When The Ordinary took off, the other brands got pushed aside because it's very difficult if you have one brand that's really driving such a huge portion of your revenues. When everyone is, facing high workload, that always gets prioritized. So then you end up ignoring the other brands versus if they had a dedicated team. And it's something now we want to actually restart our incubator engine. And actually, the only way we can do that is by having a dedicated team to that. So there are downsides. I think the other thing that made a huge difference for us, because we didn't have much money as a startup and we obviously wanted to hire all of these people, we couldn't afford experience. So everyone who was hired was pretty much straight out of university, straight out of college, just applied for their first job. And actually that meant no one really had preconditioned ideas about the beauty industry, about the way things should be. Everyone was approaching it just with almost a very practical viewpoint. And I think that made a big difference too, with actually this, how do we think differently? How do we do what others aren't doing? It was almost never something that had to be discussed because people hadn't worked for the other conglomerates for all the years.
What do you think of this concept of work-life balance? I had someone on the podcast the other day and it's called Alex Hormozi, and he was saying that he was like, people need to stop having a conversation around work-life balance because it kind of assumes that there is such a thing as a universal balance that we should all be striking. Whereas as you described it, you were happy. And your life might have been slightly one-dimensional, but but you were happy. And surely that happiness is the most important thing. And Alex Hormozi says, listen, I do two things. I work and I play video games. That's it. And I'm happy. So stop telling me to do work-life balance. I'm happy.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think, it comes down to what's the right balance to you. And it changes at different periods of your life. So I was in my 20s. I was fine. I might maybe sacrificed nights out and kind of doing other things. But I was so happy traveling all the time, being in this kind of Deciem bubble, creating all of this magic. And to me, that's such a powerful concept around how do we achieve balance at different periods of your life. We're all going to have periods where we can be working every hour and we love it. And actually, it's our work, but also it's our hobby, it's our downtime because we just love it so much. Then you have another period of your life where, maybe you have an elderly parent that needs your support. Maybe you're going through some challenges. You've got young children. How do we step up and support each other to say, do you know what? I've got you here. You do this bit, I'll cover those bits for you because in another few years, maybe it switches around. And again, that's something that I think is so unique to when we say a family culture. That to me is an example of kindness that I think really actually demonstrates it.
There has been a debate, hasn't there, about the use of the word family in the corporate world. People think it kind of asserts that there's a lack of boundaries. And these are not, Netflix's whole culture document, which is like, we're not a family, we're a high performance team. And I think I have struggled to figure out where I sit on it because there are many elements of the family culture that I always want in my businesses. That sort of care, that going above and beyond, the way, a deeper sense of relationship that's non-transactional. And then also, on the other hand, you don't fire your family. So it's, what is that balance between family and high performance team?
So for me, family is about belonging. Okay. And everyone just really feeling like they have a safe place to be and that they are loved. I think kindness sometimes is mistaken for weakness. And also I think there's a conflict between the words being kind and being nice. Being nice is kind but can be superficial. You see a stranger on the street, you're like, hi, how, you open the door. It's nice, but do you truly mean like, how are you? Or are you just kind of passing it? If someone's not performing at work, it's not necessarily a nice thing to have that conversation with them. But it is the kind thing, because if your intention is to help them, and the help may be, this is maybe a different role that we see in the company, which we think you're more suited for. It may be that we think you need this coaching, this training to get to where you need to be. And it may be that, look, you're in this role, but we're not seeing the delivery here. We actually think the better option for you is outside. And now when we've done terminations, we've done things around like, how do we do counselling, where actually it helps someone to look for another career depending on kind of what role it is and the reasons why we're leaving. Because to me, then that's a kind of way we're actually trying to help that person. And the other thing, our business, we were like kind of this, and we like had a rocket ship, kind of boomed, and then we came to a dimp just after kind of COVID. It hit me when I realised if our numbers don't pick up again, we're going to have to let people go, because actually that is the consequence of business. Like you're there to kind of do many things, but ultimately like one factor of that is to be a business and to make money. And if you start to not hit your numbers, ultimately like you can't lose money for long. People will start to say you have to save money. Where does that come from? Headcount. And I think that then hit me again that, okay, we have to perform. So to be kind to everyone, we have to be a performing team. So again, I think you can be high performing, but by being kind, I think you can make everyone feel safe and trusted that, again, if you have to make the hard decision, you're going to do it in the way to be as kind as possible and actually, have the action to try and help.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.